Okay, gewaltig. The learning should be a schus for a full shalomer for all those people who need a refuah, including Shimon Yudah ben Rivka and Yaakov Shmuel ben Chana and Shimon ben Chasya, Israel Moshe ben Gittel, Eliyahu Shagafavish ben Esther, and Yitzhak Sharcha Israel. Everyone should have a refuah shalomer. The Chainaba Alachas Mikol Arayis. The Gemara said, the Mishnah says that we discussed these compromised type of bias, just like they work for Yibum, they also create a chiyuv. Amr of Amram told us, Hom milsa Amr lon Reb Sheshes. The following halacha that I'm going to quote was told to us by Reb Sheshes, and Harinu le'ainin mimas nisim, and he brought a raya to this halacha that he shared with us from the Mishnah. Try to get this focused. And what did he tell us? Eishes Yisrael Shenensa. Rachman Litzlan, a Jewish married woman, was nenas. Aval Pisha Muteris Labaila. We know she's mutter to her husband because she didn't do it baratzon. And Rashi says we know it. This is an important pasuk. It says in the parsha of Anusa, who is mutter, it says v'hiloynit pasa. In the case of, I'm sorry, not in the case of Anusa, in the case of a mafuta, a woman who was seduced but ended up being mezana willingly, it says v'hiloynit pasa asura. Why is she usher to her husband? Because she was not nenas, and we're medayik from there hanit pasa muteres. We're soon going to see that there's another deep we make from this pasuk. It says v'hi elonit pasa asura hanit pasa muteres. This halacha that if she was nenas, it's muteres, is only v'hi, only this woman. But there's another woman that even if she's nensa, she's also going to be usher to her husband. And what woman is that? That's an Eishes Kohen. So Eishes Yisrael shenensa. And the Eishes Yisrael that was nenas, afal pisha muteres labaila psula lakuna. She's still puzzled lakuna. So Rashi, in Meis Baila, so this woman was married to a Yisrael. She was nenas. She can continue living with her husband. What happens later on? Her husband dies. She becomes an almana. So she's not allowed to marry a kohen because since she was nenas, she became puzzled forever, psula forever to marry a kohen. The Tana Tuna, and our Tana said, right, the whole point is this was illustrated by our Mishnah. And one of the items listed in the Mishnah at that point was oipsulis. So that seems to tell us that she becomes psulis as well from such a beer. My v'chein, what does it mean, v'chein? My love, because it says v'chein haba al kol achas mikol arai. So what of the previous compromised bia are we referring to that applies to make a woman psula? My love, let's say it's referring to loishna b'shoyig, loishna b'mezid, loishna b'oinis, loishna b'rotzei. So even in the case of oinis, v'katani pasla, and it says pasla. So you have a raya at first glance from our Mishnah that a woman who's nenas is still psula. Zok Gemara law, you don't have a raya from our Mishnah to this point, because maybe the faulty bia that our Mishnah is referring to that makes a woman psula is my v'chein ahara. We're saying that even if it was ahara, it wasn't a complete bia, that would also passel a woman. But of course, it would not be ba'onis, it would be ahara b'ratzayin rashis, b'ratzayin have a zayna. So the psula is because she's a zayna, because she was mazana b'ratzayin, and ahara is considered a full bia. Hara dama. Ilema da'arayos. So if you want to say the hara that we're talking about is the hara of arayos, and you're telling me here in the Mishnah that by arayos, a hara is a gemar bia, then it seems to indicate that the main place where we know hara is a gemar bia is from Yevamos. V'chein in arayos. It's not logical to say that. Remember the arayos yalthim Yevama. Are you saying that like arayos is like the topol, like to add on to Yevama? It's absolutely the opposite. Adirabba, Yevama Yalfinin Me'arayos. The Iker Hara by Rayis Ksiv, right? We learned where did the whole Makar of Hara come? It comes from Nida, where it says it's Makar Hera, and using different Zer Shabbos of Bia Bia and Kicha Kicha, we applied it to Chayv Lavin, and Chayv Yasei, and to Yibum. But the Makar is Arayis, so it's not logical to say that the Mishnah is saying that Haras Kumar Bia by Arayis as an add-on to Yevama, because Yevama is the add-on. Elamai v'chein ashaloi kedarka the Arayis. The v'chein is just like a Bia Shaloi kedarka will work to be Koina Yevama. So too, you'll violate the Isra Arayis with a Bia Shaloi kedarka. Fact Gemara again, you cannot say that. Adrabah, Iker Mishkevei Isha by Arayis Ksiv. Where do we know a Bia Shaloi kedarka is considered a Bia L'Alocha? Is from Mishkevei Isha, which is directly addressing Arayis. Elamai v'chein. So what is the Mishnah referring to? Where it's sort of illustrating an add-on to what we're learning from Yevamos to Arayis. It must be Ashaloi Kedarka the Chayvei Laben. Chayvei Laben, we didn't bring a special limud for that Abiyah Shaloi Kedarka, you'll be over the lab. So that's what our Mishnah is referring to, just like Abiyah Shaloi Kedarka works to be Koina Yevama, so too you'll be over a lab by Chayvei Laben. Okay. Omar Rabba, Zokt Rabba, H's Koyin Shenensa. Chman Latlon, a woman who's married to a Koyin is Nenas. Baila Loika La Mishum Zayna. Now she becomes Osra to him. She becomes Osra to him because she's Posel al Zayna. And Rashi says, Baila Loika La Mishum Zayna. It's just to the left in Rashi, maybe an inch down. Dichsib Zayna Lo Yikach. It says that a Koyin is not allowed to marry a Zayna. Ustam Zayna. What is the meaning of a Zayna? Hainu Mina Efes Tachas Baila. That's a woman who is mezana while she's married. Shetasa me'acha Baila. The word Zayna means she turned away. So she turned away from her husband, Lazarim, to strangers. Vizu, and this woman, Apagav de Nensa, even though she didn't do this willingly, she was Nensa, Gabe Koyin like Polig Rachmana, Bein Oynes, Bein Rots. By a Koyin, the Torah doesn't differentiate between an Oynes and a Rotzon. Kidigarmina, like we learned, Mivihi Loines Fasa. It says by a regular woman, she's only considered usher to her husband because she was not forced. And that's why she's usher to her husband. But the word he, meuta mashma, which means he eshes yisrael, kudi yesh chiluk beinit pasa leloinit pasa. The only type of woman where it makes a difference whether she was forced or not, lagabe being usher to her husband, is a basis, is a eshes yisrael. Aval eshes koyin ain't chiluk. Even if she was nenas, she still becomes a zoyna. She still gets the status of a zoyna, and she becomes usher to her husband. Zokt Gemara, mishum zoyna in mishum tumaloi. Are you telling me the Isra is only out zoyna loikach? It's not out the Isra tuma. What is the Isra tuma? In other words, there's another reason why someone may not live with a woman who was zinsa. And Rashi says, mishum tumaloi bitmiya hamrina perkama. We learned on Daf Yud Aleph. Hamani mekayim acharei ashehu tamo. It says in the pasuk, if someone divorces his wife and she goes and marries another man, she may not, and then her second marriage dissolves. The original husband, her first husband, may not take her back. Acharei ashehu tamo, because she became tamei. And we darshan from those extra words, acharei ashehu tamo, is that not only can a man not take a wife back who was married to another man after her first marriage terminated, but even a woman who's a soita, l'rabba soita shenivala, a woman who was mezana, is also to her husband. So the place where we know that a woman who's mezana, beratzon, is also to her husband, is from this pasuk of acharei asher utama. So freit the Gemara, is there no iser acharei asher utama by a eishes koyin shezinsa even b'ainis? So you're right. In fact, that issue would apply as well. So why did Rava choose to say that it's loikala mishum zayna? So ema af mishum zayna. Rava said it's poshut that the acharei asher utama applies to the kohen, and he may not continue living with his wife who was Nensa, but there's also going to be a second Isser of Zayin. That's the first lashon of Rava. Most of Rab Zeir. So Rab Zeir challenged Rava. The Hila Nitbasa Asura, Hanitbasa Muteris. The Yesh Lachacheres, but there's another woman referring to a Ashes claim. Shava Bisha Nitbasa, even though she's Nitbasa, Asura, she's Asur anyway. The Ezu, and which woman is this woman who's Asur, even though she's Nitbasa? Zu Ashes claim. Now, the Lav Haba, Michlal Asay, is an Asay. So how could you tell me she's like Mishum Zaina? The only reason why we say she's Asur to her husband is because of this pasuk, because otherwise an Ashes Yisrael is not Asur if she was Nensa, and this pasuk is only a deal. So it's a Lav Haba Michlal Asay. Yet Rava said, Baila Loika Allah Mishum Zaina. Rava didn't stop say that it's Asur. Rava said he'll get Malchus, but you don't get Malchus for a Lav Haba Michlal Asay. Zok Rabba, a beautiful chiddush. Omer Rabba, really hakoil hoyu bichlal zayin. It all depends on what the baseline is, what the default is. The default is any woman who was with another man, whether it was oinus, whether it was rotten, by default that woman has the label of a zayin. Kishaparat lachakosuf gabei Ashes Yisrael. When the Torah specified by an Ashes Yisrael, the Hila Nitbasa Asura, Hanitbasa Muteres, that took one woman out of that default. Michlal, the Ashes Kohen, Kidekaima Kaima. So the Ashes Yisrael was removed from the default, and we said that she's not a Zaina, but everyone else remains in that pool. And therefore, the Isser is the Isser Zaina. The Isser Zaina was always there. There's an Isser for a Kohen to marry a Zaina. The pasuk that rescues an Ashes Yisrael from this pool does not apply to an Ashes Kohen. So therefore, there's actually still a lav there, and therefore it's justified for Rava to say Ashes Kohen Shenetza by the Loika Aleh Mishum Zayin. The Ika da Amri, there was another nusach of how this went down. Omer Rab, Ashes Kohen Shenetza by the Loika Aleh Mishum Tuma. The earlier lashon was, like Rava said, the Kohen is like a Mishum Zaina, and we touched af Mishum Zaina. Now Rava is saying she's not like a Mishum Zaina, rather she's like a Mishum Tuma. And the Gemara makes the same deal. Mishum Tuma in Mishum Zaina loy. The Gemara you see from here, Alma ba'onis loy karina bei Zaina. So Rava's conclusion is that a woman who's an oinis, she might be usher to her husband if it's a Kohen, but it's not a Zaina. A Zaina it's not. She doesn't get that shameful label. Most of Rab Zeir, correct Rab Zeir on Rabba. Behila nitbasa asura hanitbasa muteres. V'yesh lachacheres shafal pisha nitbasa asura ve'ezu zu eishes koyin. V'lav haba mechlal asay. Even to tell me that acharei asher hu tama, that lav lo yuchal bai lo rishon. Acharei asher tama, that lav also applies to a woman who was nensa. You could only say that using this lav haba mechlal asay. So once again, Rabbi, how could you say by the loy kalam mishum tuma? It's also relying on the lav haba mechlal asay, which should not give somebody malchus. Amar Rabba, the same answer. Hakoil hayu bechlal acharei asher hu tama. Really, every woman by default who even was netza is covered by the umbrella of acharei asher hu tama, and she's now also to her husband. It's only an Ashes Yisrael who was removed from that baseline, who was removed from that default. But Mechalal, the Ashes Kohen, the Ashes Kohen remains in the rule of Acharei Asher Tama, that she's usher to her husband. So the final is that everybody holds that there's an Isser Daraisa for a Kohen to marry to stay on living with his wife if she was Nensa. The Shaila is, surely there's an Isser of Acharei Asher Hu Tama. The whole Shaila is there also an Isser Zon? Zok Tehelig Mishnah Vayter. Almana LeKohen Gadol, which we know is an Isser Lav. Gerusha v'chalutza LeKohen Hedjit, or a Kohen Hedjit who may not marry a Gerusha or a Chalutza. And now, it's important to note that a kohen may not marry a grusha. That's an isur lav. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that a kohen cannot marry a chalutza. That a kohen cannot marry a chalutza is only an isur d'rabbanan. And therefore, there's a shaila if chalutza in our Mishnah belongs here, or if it's just agav shigra delishna, that grusha and chalutza are always placed together, which you find in other places as well. So let's see what it says over here. There's one important thing. There's one very important thing I wanted to mention before we go weiter. And I want to draw your attention to a Tosfos Yeshanim at the bottom of Nun Vav Amud Aleph. And it says over here, Haba alachas mikol harayis hamuris b'Torah oy psulos. Zok the Tosfos Yeshanim the davka hani. Avol bias nus the pnuya. If a pnuya is mizana, loy pasal l'koyin. She will not be pasal to a koyin. V'loy mashvil azayna. So a Jewish woman, a pnuya, who does nus, does not become osir to a koyin. The less the sovar, there's nobody who holds that panui habala pnuya lav ishus asa l'shem ishus shaloi l'shem ishus asa zayna el rabalazav l'shvilakam. So nobody holds that panui habala pnuya shaloi l'shem ishus makes her into a zayna. And why is it important to point this out? Because this actually is something that's very, very relevant in the Baal Tshuva world. A girl once wrote a tshuva to Rav Avadia Yosef that I'm a Pnuya Shezinsa, it came from, and she wanted to know if she could marry a kohen. So I don't remember exactly how Rav Avadia Yosef answered the question, but this question was also asked by a Pnuya Shezinsa to Reb Moshe, and Reb Moshe said it's a complicated shaila, because the question is does a girl who was on a college campus, which is generally a promiscuous type of environment, is she even a menace to saying that back then when she was there that she was only zinsa with a Yisrael? How do we know that she wasn't zinsa with somebody that could have made her into a zayna? So in Reb Moshe's tshuva, like a goy, right? So Reb Moshe in the tshuva writes, it's a complicated shaila, and Reb Moshe writes, I think you need to come to my apartment and we need to discuss this in person. I can't be myrich on these types of shailas in print, in a letter. So Reb Moshe was saying, tell her to come. But Avada is clear that if we know it was only with the Yisrael, she would not be a zoyna. So this has a very big implication in practical halacha today. Okay. Correct. Pnuya shezinsa. If it's punish shezinsa in punish, so if she was mezana with a Yisrael, even if she was a nida, it does not make her a zoyna, and she will still be mutter to marry even a kohen. Okay, so good morning, weiter.
As a side, Yosy, I know for certain about a Gioris who, when she got married, insisted that she gets the ksuba of Basula, and the Rabbanim relented.
Yeah, because you're allowed to add to your ksuba anyway. You're allowed to add to your ksuba.
Okay. But they wrote to Mosayim.
You're right. The amount there, I doubt they wrote she was a psula. They wrote she gets the same amount.
Oh, okay. That I don't know, but I remember
the money
that
you can add as much as you want. It just shows that she wants her husband to think 2-3 times before he divorces her, which is the whole problem, which is the whole reason for her ksuba. But I hear. Okay, so these are sensitive questions, but they're very real and they're very relevant. I also didn't mention yesterday, which was I don't know why I'm jumping back into the same fire that I'm so happy to have gotten out of, but yesterday was a very sensitive Gemara. So in the Shmuzah, Rabbi Raza Gaze, he says you shouldn't think, you can't talk about these things. Because we know we all got married once upon a time, and the night of your wedding, many chasanim have a question: was the bia complete? Is she also al tamusul? Is she not? And your chassan rabbi tells you have to have a rabbi available to call to answer any questions. So can you imagine this Rav is discussing with this freshly married boy the nitty-gritty of exactly how it happened and when it happened? That's tired. That's kedusha. That's not something that we have to shun, as long as it's discussed properly. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. Almana l'kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedjit. Mina erisin. What if it was only mina erisin? Lo yoichlu b'tshuma. So let's see what Rashi says. Mina erisin lo yoichlu b'tshuma mishas nesgachu la'elu kedusha avera. So here's a woman who was not allowed to be married to a kohen. So let's for instance pick the first case of the Mishnah. We had an almana. She was not allowed to be married to a kohen gadol. The kohen gadol only made erisin on her. He did not make nesuin, so there was no bia, and they weren't even allowed to do bia yet because it was only a rusa. Nevertheless, look Rashi, nishas and eskatula elu kedushi avera is as soon as the kedushin is made an unlawful kedushin, nifzala milech al truma deveinash. Surely she can't eat truma from her husband. We already learned until she's in the suah, she can't eat from her husband's. She can't eat truma on her husband's account if she's a bas Yisrael. But what if she was a bas kohen? So she was eating truma anyway at home. If she accepts an erisin from a kohen gadol, now she can't even eat the truma from home. She becomes possible. So niftala bilecha b'truma devinasha in bas kohen, and therefore lo yoichlu b'truma. However, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Machshirin, they said it's muter, and Rashi says acheti boila. Until there's a bia ha'asura, she's still allowed to eat truma if she's a bas kohen. So acheti boiloi, because at that point v'tasa chalola. When does she become mechuleles? When does she lose her status of kahuna? That's only after a bia, not after a kedushin. K'dechsiv lo yichalel shnei chalulan echad lo v'echad lazar. Side the children born from such a bia would be chalalim, but the woman herself also becomes mechuleles from such a bia. What if they were married, be'isr, so now they're chalalim, but they lost their husbands died, or their husbands divorced them, mina nesuin psulais. But if they were nesua, that means they were having bia with this man who they were also to have bia with, they remain pasul forever. But mina erisin ksheris, even according to the Tanakama, a woman who's makabel kedushin from a kohen gadol and she's an almana, she wasn't allowed to. So during that period that she's mi'uresach, she may not eat truma. If that kedushin terminates, either through a get or through a death, she can go back to eat truma. She's not permanently nifselas from eating truma. Let's see Rashi. This armaloi niskarshu mina koyanim alalu mina nesuim psulois this shavya chalala b'viyosy. She became a permanent chalala because she had bia. But mina erisin ksheris tafilu Reb Meir like possible mina erisin ele b'chayein. Reb Meir even Reb Meir, who's the Tanakama of our Mishnah, who says she's puzzled with the kedushin, it's only while she's mikudeshes to them. Why? The mishtameres l'bia psula. There's something called a mishtameres l'bia psula. She is destined. She's right now in the track, in the funnel to become niveles. Because what comes after kedushin? Nisuin. So she's in line, in track. She's already her car's already hooked up in the car wash belt. It's starting to pull it through. She's eventually destined to have a bia psula. That's why she's usher to truma. But if the car wash stops and the belt stops moving and the car wash is terminated, then loy, because she's no longer mishtameres l'bia psula. Okay, so to more Well, there's another interesting factoid that I forgot to mention yesterday. That usually if I forget to mention it, so I lose my opportunity. But this is a good one. We learned yesterday that she'eroi, even a woman who's no longer alive, is considered an eshes, a she'eroi. The Gemara even had a havamina that such a woman, if you're boiler, you'd be mechuyev al seis eshes. So the Gemara brought a raya from a pasuk you're not. But this is very relevant. Why is it very relevant? Because when a person dies, we know a woman who loses her husband, she's now allowed to marry another man, right? So we say that her marriage terminated, right? We always say that. So when Mashiach comes and there's Tchias Mesim, are you going to have to remarry your wives? Are we all going to have to remarry our wives because our marriage was terminated? What about Eliyahu Hanavi, who went up to Shemayim? Is his wife an aguna? So does the marriage actually get terminated by Misa? Or is it just a special heter that you can marry somebody else? And it becomes relevant in that perspective. So I don't know the answer to all these things, but it's just an interesting thing to think about. Tanya, Reb Meir, Kal v'chomer, Uma kedusha rishus. Madich kedusha rishus. There's two pshatim in this Gemara. Rashi has a first shot which he does not like. He has a second shot which he does like, and all the Rishonim don't like Rashi's second shot, but only like Rashi's first shot. So I'm going to start with Rashi's second shot, and if the oil likes it, we'll just go weiter. So Tanya Amr Meir, Kavachayim, Uma kedusha rishus. Madich, if a Yisrael marries a Yisraelis, ein machilin, he's not going to be able to get her to eat truma. Kedusha Avera, a kohen who's marrying a grusha, which is a kedushin of Isser, loy kol shekain, surely that should stop her from being able to eat truma. And this is what Rashi says. Ma kedusha rishos kohen Yisrael shekidish bas kohen. Oh, I apologize. I mixed up Rashi's second shot with Rashi's first shot. So let's try this again. Ma kedusha rishos. Madich a Yisrael who marries a bas kohen, whose kedushin is not an avera. A Yisrael may marry a bas kohen. A machilin, when he marries her, he now disqualifies her from eating. Meaning, a manichin oisan lecho, she's no longer allowed to eat truma. Once she becomes married to Yisrael, itnan lekamana erison poistel beper kaman lekoin gadol. Once he makes erison on a bas kohen, she is from here on disqualified from eating truma. So kedusha avera, a kohen who marries a normana or a grusha, which is a kedusha avera, surely would not work. So this is Rashi's first shot is Madich a Yisrael who marries a kohen, a kohenes, where there's no Isser. He disqualifies her from eating truma. Kol shekain. If a kohen marries a woman illegally, it should disqualify from eating truma. So what do you ask me? No, so Reb Meir is trying to prove his point. Reb Meir has a machlokes with Rabbi Elazar and Reb Shimon. So Reb Meir is trying to prove his point that when a kohen does erison on a bas kohen, and it's an illegal erison because she was a grusha, that he disqualifies her from eating truma. So Reb Meir is trying to prove his point. I mixed up because I said the second shot in Rashi, but we'll stick to the first shot in Rashi because that's what I said. Amrulai. So they responded to him, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, who holds that the kedushin ha'asurin will not disqualify the bas kohen from eating truma. Amrulai told him, Loyim amrit the kedusha rishos shekein ein lo lahacham u'makamacher. You know why if a Yisrael marries a kohenes, as soon as the kedushin is made, she's disqualified from eating truma? That's because a Yisrael can never give anybody, a Yisrael can never bring any woman a right to eat truma. He's a Yisrael. Tomer b'kedusha avera. This kohen has within the power to grant a woman permission to eat truma, because any other woman that he would marry who's mutter to him would be able to eat truma. If he married any other bas kohen that was mutter to him, that was not a grusha, of course you would continue to eat truma, and even the Israelis would be able to eat truma a day's kedusha. So you can't bring me a right that he'll disqualify a woman who's also. So that's the machlokes, and that's the end of this shayla. Amar Belazar Amar Boishia, Psuadaka Koyim. A Psuadaka, it says the Torah Lo Yovai Psuadaka B'chal Hashem. So Psuadaka sounds to us like something that's very not relevant. Psuadaka means a mutilated aver, an aver doesn't function. But it's actually a fairly common condition that's no longer considered a Psuadaka. It's something called a hypospadias, and that is when instead of the hole being at the end of the gid, the hole is at the side of the gid, because the channel that brings the urine through the gid is not completely formed, and therefore it doesn't function properly. So today they fix everything, so it's not considered a psuadaka, but this would have been considered psuadaka.
That's not how ArtScroll translates it.
Oh, but that Meroyach Oshech is touched as scrambled eggs. That's Meroyach Oshech. But I can't argue the ArtScroll because the ArtScroll knows a lot better than I do. But Psudak, whatever it is, it's someone who's not going to be able to have children because of a physical situation. But I believe in the olden days, a hypospadias might have been considered a Psudak. Okay. So he's not allowed to marry a Jewish girl. Shekidish Bas Yisrael. But he illegally made kedushin on a Bas Yisrael, which he was not allowed to. Banu l'machloikas Reb Meir, Rabbi Elazar Bashim. This is also going to be totally in a machlokes Reb Meir and Reb Elazar B'Shimon. The Reb Meir, according to Reb Meir, who holds Mishtameres will be a psula doiraisa loyachla. According to Reb Meir, who holds that if someone is Mishtameres, means the condition was done, and now she's in the track, she's in the car wash line, and she's going to be doing a via psula. What's the difference if it's a via psula of a gerusha to a kohen hedjit, or if it's a via psula of a psula daka to a Yisraelis? Loyachla, over there he doesn't let her eat truma. So hanami loyachla, in the case of a psula daka, she would not be able to eat truma. But Reb Shimon, dami mishtameres will be a psula deiraisa achla, hanami achla. So let's see Rashi. All the way at the bottom. Psula daka, mishtameres will be a psula deiraisi. That's called mishtameres will be a psula deiraisa because she's a rusa to a man who, if there's a bia done, it's going to be a bia that's also midaraisa. So the Gemara wants to suggest that this is the same shaila as the mechlokes in our Mishnah. Just like the mechlokes in our Mishnah is about whether or not if you're in a relationship with Erison, which bia is going to be an issue deraisa. Reb Meir holds that woman could not eat truma. So too by a psula daka. Zokma, you don't have a right. Mimai dil ma'at can like come Reb Elazar Reb Shimon Hasam. Why were Reb Elazar Reb Shimon mekel in the case of a grusha l'kayin hedjit? Because this kohen, he's fully qualified to be machal somebody with truma. If he married a woman that was mutter to him, he would be machal them with truma. When the kohen himself is a psula daka, there's no one who he could possibly be machal with truma, because whoever he would marry would be usher to him. A psula daka cannot find a single Jewish woman that he's allowed to marry. Loy. So there, even Reb Elazar and Reb Shimon would agree, maybe, that the psula daka would not be able to be machal on a rusa with truma. You might say a psula daka could be machal a woman truma, because there is a woman who could possibly marry a psula daka. Who's allowed to marry a psula daka? The bas gerim, a daughter of gerim. And Rashi says the kasavar kahal gerim lo ikri kahal. It says lo yavi psula daka bekahal Hashem, but the daughter of gerim is not considered a woman who is bekal Hashem, and therefore ve'enon bechlal lo yavi psula daka, and therefore v'noisa beheter, he's allowed to marry this woman umachila truma. So why not a giyaris herself? A giyaris herself, a kohen can't marry because she's a zoina. But if her parents were gerim and she was born from parents that were gerim, it's not called kahal Hashem. Therefore, a psula daka could marry her. She is a bas Yisrael, so you have a hechatimsa where even a psula daka could be Michael a bas Yisrael truma. So therefore, maybe even if he married a regular bas Yisrael who is bekal Hashem, which would be the Isser, if he made an Erison the Isser, maybe he would be Michaeler the truma as well. Frank the Gemara, are you so sure that kahal gerim lo yikri kahal? Are you so sure that a psula daka would be able to marry bas gerim? Rabbi Yochanan asked this same question of Rabbi Yoshia. We'll see it later on in today's daf. Rabbi Yochanan asked the child of Rabbi Yoshia whether or not kahal gerim ikri kahal or not, whether or not a bas gerim could marry a psula daka. Well, I postulate, and Rabbi Yoshia was unable to provide Rabbi Yochanan with an answer. So you can't be so sure about this. And you know who's declaring this shaila? It's Rabbi Yoshia, right? If we look back to the Amud Beis, it was Rabbi Yoshia who declared this shaila. Rabbi Yoshia was the one who said, Rabbi Yoshia is the one who said, Amar Rabbi Yoshia psula daka kohen shekidush bas Yisrael banu l'machlokes. And Rabbi Yoshia himself isn't so sure as to whether or not this would work. Zok to Gemara, Itmar, Abai Omar, Hoyel umachila below yada. Abaya holds that if he doesn't have beer with him, so Rashi paints the case. There was a man who's a kohen, was married to a woman. He was a regular kosher kohen, and he was married to a woman. So naturally, this woman is allowed to eat truma. It's the Eishes kohen. And then Rachman al-Itzlan, the man got injured, and he became a psula daka after he got married. So the halacha is, if he no longer has beer with her, she still can continue to eat truma. She got her status of an oichel truma when she married him, and it was a kosher v'yosher marriage. Rachman suddenly got injured, so now he's no longer allowed to have beer with her. If he has beer with her, he will passel her. But if he doesn't have beer with her, he will not passel her. So Zok Abaye, we consider a psuadak as somebody who could be Michael, a woman with truma, even if it's not a bas gerim. He could be Michael, a regular bas Yisrael with truma, if he was married to her before he got injured, and he didn't have bia with her after he got injured. Rav Amar, even a psuadaka, he might not be able to marry a woman, but he can cause others to get the status of Eichel Truma by buying avodim. Because we know, Kinyan Kasboy, if a kohen buys avodim, those shvachos, are allowed to eat Truma. So therefore, this person is considered a Michael B'Truma. Therefore, maybe Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon would agree that if a psuadaka kohen makes kedushin on a woman, she will still be able to eat Truma. So the question is, Abaya used as an example to illustrate how this kohen is a Michael B'Truma with his own wife, who he was Michael or B'Truma before he became a psuadaka. Rava picked the case where even post psuadaka, he's being Michael Truma, but not a spouse. He's Michael his possessions, his avodim and shvachos. So the question is, why did Abai pick his example, and why did Rava pick his example? Abai didn't like Rava's example. Is kinyan de ishus, mikinyan de ishus yalfinon, v'lo yalfinon kinyan de ishus, mikinyan de avodim. Abai was trying to prove that here we have a child of ishus. He made kedushin on a woman. Could he be Michael or Truma? So Abai wanted to illustrate that through a kedushin, through a marriage, this kohen can still be Michael, somebody the Truma. Rava Lamer Kabai. Why didn't Rava like Abai's suggestion, which seems to be very good? Through a kinyan de ishus, he's being Michael's wife the Truma. Because shiny hasam shekvar ochla. There's a very big difference. Over there, she was already eating Truma because she was married to him before his injury. So you're just showing me that the psuadaka is continuing this license to eat Truma. But you don't see that a psuadaka can initiate a license to Truma. The Abaye, shekfar ochel lo yarminan. Abaye doesn't see any merit in the fact that up until now she was able to eat. Because as we know with all investments, past performance doesn't have any influence on future performance. And I'll prove it to you, Dr. Abaye. If you don't agree to me that you cannot include, there's no mila of the fact that he was able to be Michael in the past, well then Bas Yisrael shenisas l'koyin umis. We had this argument by Rab Nosson yesterday. A Bas Yisrael who was married to a koyin, and therefore she was able to eat Truma. Umis, and then the koyin died. Teichel, are you going to suggest that she could continue to eat Truma, even though her marriage is gone, shikfar achla? Of course not. So therefore, there's no advantage whatsoever in the fact that she was able to eat Truma until now. Correct. But even if she has children and her husband dies, she's not eating because of her husband. It's because she got a new license. She got the license of her children. But a past license has no impact on you. But Rava, what about Rava? Rava holds that shikfar achla is a factor, and that's why he didn't want to use Abai's example. Hasam paka kinyane. Where a bas kohen loses her husband, or where a woman who's married to a kohen loses her husband and therefore loses her status, is because her kinyan, her marriage went away. Hakala paka kinyane. But the example that I'm talking about, where kfar achla is a factor, is where she was married to him and she's still married to him. He just got injured. So therefore, I don't like that right. Oh, the marriage. So we mentioned a little while ago, a couple of minutes ago, that is, that Rabbi Oishia didn't know the answer whether or not a psuadaka is allowed to marry a baskerim. So here's where the shaila was, and it was a very interesting situation. Psuadaka koyin shenasa baskerim. A psuadaka koyin who married baskerim. Mau shiachilena b'truma. Would she be able to eat truma on his account? Ishtik, Rabbi Oishia was quiet. He ignored Abai's question. Later on, another great rabbi entered the study hall, and he asked Rabbi Oishia a different question. And that person got an answer out of Rabbi Oishia. Umanu, who is this great Rav who came next? Rish Lakish. So Rabbi Yehuda on the Siyah protested. Amar le Rabbi Yehuda Nesiyah Rabbi Oishia. Alter Rabbi Yochanan. Lav Gava Rabbahu. What's up? Is you ignored Rabbi Yochanan? Is he not a great rabbi? Was he not worthy of your answering his question? Amar le Rabbi Oishia answered. The reason why I didn't answer his question has nothing to do with his greatness. Is the kaboy minai milto the less lapasri. He asked me a question that doesn't have an answer. So there's two pshatim in this. Rashi's pshat that he likes is not that there's no answer to this question. I didn't have the answer. He asked me a question. I didn't know the answer. I didn't answer him because I didn't have an answer. He asked a very good question. So I'm not able to control myself, even though it's late and I should be finishing the Amid, but I can't control myself. And I want to say over a story that's going to get under Moti's skin. What is a Gavar Rabbah? What is the definition of a Gavar Rabbah? So we know what the definition of a Gavar Rabbah is because our dear Rav once got up and told us what a Gavar Rabbah is. The Gemara in Makis says, I don't know who the Mandam who said it was. He says, I'm always blown away by people who'll stand up for a Sefer Torah, but won't stand up for a Gavar Rabbah, because a Gavar Rabbah is greater than the Sefer Torah. Why is a Gavar Rabbah greater than the Sefer Torah? Because the Sefer Torah gave 40 malchus, and the Gavar Rabbah said, no, he overruled the Torah, he said there's only 39 malchus. So the kasha is, if the Gavar Rabbah is someone who can overrule the Torah, so there's an earlier place in the Torah where the Rabbanim overruled the Torah, and that was by Sfiras Haimer. The Torah says 50 days, and we actually make it into 49 days. So why did he bring a raya from a later portion of the Torah where it talks about Malchus? Why didn't the Gemara bring a raya that a Gavar Rabbah overrules the Torah from earlier places? So this question was asked by the officer to I believe Reb Chaim Ozer, he was the Gadol Ador, he was the Paisha Gador. I think it was Reb Chaim Ozer, or Reb Yisrael Zalman. It was either Reb Zalman or Reb Chaim Ozer. He met. They were on vacation. They met, and this question was asked. What happened was, Reb Chaim Ozer told the officer, maybe say over a vart. I want to hear a vart from you. And the officer, no, you say over a vart. So I think the Chaim Ozer told the officer, you're a Gavar Rabbah, so I want you to tell me a vart. So Chaim Ozer says, I'm a Gavar Rabbah, you're a Gavar Rabbah. Let me tell you what a Gavar Rabbah is. And he asked him this question. He says, you know what the answer is? The answer is that the Rav overrules the Torah. That's not a Gavar Rabbah. A Gavar Rabbah is someone who prevents Klal Yisrael from pain. So the Torah said 40 malchus, and the Gavar Rabbah said, no, don't give me 40 malchus. Give him only 39 malchus. A Gavar Rabbah is a person who protects Klal Yisrael from pain. Remember that word? I remember that word very stark. Anyway, Zok to Gemara weiter. I'm sorry for putting you to a bad mood. Zok to Gemara. Okay, anyway, Zok to Gemara. Why don't I have an answer? Why is Dr. Ba'oshia don't I have an answer to Rabbi Yochanan's question as to whether or not a kohen suadaka who marries, who does a kedushin on the bas gerim, or does even a nesuin on the bas gerim, I don't have the answer as to whether or not he'll be Michael or Truma, is as follows. Either Rabbi Yehuda, if you hold like Rabbi Yehuda, that bas gerim, kal gerim, lo yikra kal, and therefore he is allowed to marry her, well then, bein b'ktushasei koi, bein lav b'ktushasei koi, lo ochla. Sai if the psuadaka retains his kedusha, and let's see what Rashi says. Ben b'ktushasei koi, like a mom b'perika oral. In perika oral, the Gemara could have a shayla. He boy like koin psuadaka mau b'giyaris. Is a koin psuadaka allowed to marry a giyaris? A regular koin is not allowed to marry a giyaris. Why? Do you say b'ktushasei koi? It says he can marry a zoyna, and the giyaris has a status of a zoyna. So do you say the kohen psuadaka retains his status of a kohen, and all of the women who are prohibited to marry a kohen are still prohibited to marry a kohen psuadaka, and therefore for usher zok Rabbi v'hacha, in this case bein b'ktushasei kohen, even if the kohen is not allowed to marry a giyaris, kohen and nasa psuadaka, bein b'kedushas kohen, or if he is in the kedushas kohen, but asur b'chol ha'asuris laguna, and he's not allowed to marry anyone who's asur laguna, or bein lav b'kedushasei kohen, or even if he is allowed to marry women who normally a kohen can't marry, either way it would be lo yachla. So either Rabbi Yehuda, bein b'kedushasei kohen, bein lav b'kedushasei kohen, lo yachla, she wouldn't be able to eat. Zok Rashi b'kedushasei kohen lo yachla. The Amar Mar. So the Gemara fears us. The Gemara elaborates. If the kohen is not allowed to marry a giyaris, still she shouldn't be allowed to eat. Why? The Amar Mar said, Bas ger zachar, the daughter of a ger zachar, kivas halal zachar, is like a halal. So therefore she wouldn't be able to eat. She shouldn't be able to eat truma. And ilav b'kedushasei kohen, and even if he does not have the kedusha of a kohen and he's allowed to marry any woman, still lo yachla. The Amrinon kahal gerim ikrikal. Rabbi Yehuda holds Kal Gerim Ikri Kal, which means the Psua Daka was not allowed to marry this woman. So surely she couldn't eat. V'ili Rabbi Yosy, and if we hold like Rabbi Yosy, who holds Kal Gerim Lo Ikri Kal, well then Bein B'Kedusha Koi, Bein La B'Kedusha Koi, whether or not the Kohen is allowed to marry a Geyaris is irrelevant. Achla, she would be able to eat. If the Kohen retains his status where he's not allowed to make Geyaris, Achla, she could still eat because he's allowed to live with this woman because she's not a Geyaris, she's a Bas Geyaris. The Amar, Af Ger, Shanisa Geyaris, Bidai Cher Lakuna. A Ger who married a Geyaris, their daughter is not a Geyaris herself, she's allowed to marry a Kohen. So this is a kosher marriage, and therefore he would be able to be Meichaler with Truma. And if the Kohen does not have the status and he's allowed to marry any woman, then for sure Ka'achla. The Amar Kal Gerim La Ikri Kal, because Kal Gerim La Ikri Kal, and a Suadaka is allowed to marry this woman. So therefore, I didn't answer the question because, well, actually, I'm a little bit mistaken. The way Rashi learns is here the Gemara, even though Rabbi Yosy didn't answer the question, the Gemara is jumping in and the Gemara is answering the question. And the Gemara is saying, according to Rabbi Yehuda, everybody would agree Lo Yachla. According to Rabbi Yosy, everybody agrees Achla, but it is a good shaila Ela Liba da Haitan. It would be a good shaila according to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Ela Liba da Haitan that none Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, Isha Bas Gerim, a woman who's the daughter of Gerim, Loisi Nase Lekahuna. She's not allowed to marry a Kohen, unless her mother is Mi Yisrael. And there are those who learn either parent. Either one of the parents have to be Mi Yisrael. Only then can the child of a ger or a geyaris allowed to marry a kohen. And therefore, and this is why it is a legitimate question with two good sides. Do we say kisheres mitoisvaba the achla or kashrus mitoisvaba achla? The fact that she has one parent who's Jewish gives her kashrus, and therefore she would be able to eat the truma. And Rashi has two pshatim, and we'll look at Rashi's first pshat. So let's have a look. Kashrus itosvabas of Rashi. She merely has but the fact that one of her parents was Jewish, so that adds her some kashrus, which will allow her to marry a kohen. Therefore, she's allowed to marry a kohen. But v'laf kedusha l'kriya kal. She doesn't have kedusha as kahal, because the moment she's called a kahal, she's no longer allowed to marry a psuadaka. So it's very interesting. There's her status lagabe whether or not she can marry a kohen, and there's her status whether or not she's allowed to marry a psuadaka. And it's very counterintuitive because she has kashrus from the fact that one of her parents were Jewish, which now allows her to marry a kohen, but she's still not considered a kahal, and therefore a psuadaka is allowed to marry her. And therefore, umuteres l'psuadaka, and therefore voichelas mimanashich, and therefore she will be able to eat truma. Even if this kohen, a psuadaka, is b'kedusha's kohen, he's not allowed to marry a grusha, he's allowed to marry this woman. She's mutter to him because kashrus itoisvaba, she now is appropriate to marry a kohen. But she's still not usher to marry him because he's a psuadaka, because she's not called a kal. So it's interesting. She's mutter l'kahuna, but she's not called kahal. It's very counterintuitive. Maybe when you say that this woman becomes kosher l'kahuna, automatically that means she's now kahal. So when this woman gets her status that she's allowed to marry a kohen, does that also automatically include that she's called kahal Yisrael? And therefore, vasur l'psuadaka v'loya. So according to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, you'll have this shaila. A woman who has one parent who's Jewish, who is allowed to marry a kohen, what does that status mean that she could marry a kohen? Does it just mean she's a head to marry a kohen, but she's still not kahal? So therefore, her marriage to this kohen is mutter, which means that she's considered kahal, and therefore she's not allowed to marry him. Zaktamar Tashma, we have a pasha teraya because Kiyasar Abacha Barchinim Midraima. When Abacha Barchinim came from the south, also he came. He quoted the Bryce, and the Bryce is exactly our shaila. So this is the answer to the shaila Rabbi Yechanan asked. How do you know that he will be Meichel B'Truma? Shenemar v'koyin ki yikne nefesh kinyan kasboy yochel boy. A kohen who buys anything, kedushin is included in that. That person can eat truma. Laman, why do we need this pasuk for? According to Rabbi Yehuda, I don't need this pasuk because it's not true. Rabbi Yehuda holds that kal gerim ikri kal, and therefore he's not allowed to be married to her, so he for sure cannot be Meichel B'Truma. Rabbi Yosy, Lamali Kra. According to Rabbi Yosy, I don't need a pasuk to tell me. Kal Gerim Lavrik Kal. Again, it wasn't part of the Shiloh, so I don't need a pasuk. The only mandomer that holds I need a pasuk to tell me that this woman is allowed to eat truma is a lav Rabbi Ben Yaakov u'shmamina sheiris kashrus itosvu achla shmamina. You see that the fact that she had one parent Jewish just makes her mutter to marry a kohen, but it does not make her kal Yisrael, and therefore a psudaka can still marry her. Okay, we'll stop here.